So while we're taking a second to go ahead and get started this morning, I want to share just a reminder that all of our sessions for Fabulous Fridays will be recorded. And and if you use this QR code that's on the screen right here, it'll take you to the website. Then we'll have all of the resources that we share for all of the Fabulous Fridays, all of the webinar recordings, and the poll directions as well. And if you're not familiar with QR codes, you just hold your phone up and take a picture of it, and it'll take you right there.
That sounds like a lot of magic to me, Mandie. Are you sure something like that works?
Well, I also feel like it's a lot of magic, and I was recently at a restaurant and people had to show me how to use it so I could see the menu to order, and it did work. So
Okay. Well, there's new technology every day.
it is.
So, shall we get started on our Fabulous Fridays for February the 17th?
That sounds great. So welcome to Fabulous Fridays, sponsored by Montana State University Extension, the Montana 4-H Foundation, and the Montana Center for Youth Development. This is we're happy to welcome you to our fourth Fabulous Friday this year. And today's topic is what you can and cannot do with a will. So I am Mandie Reed. I am the Wheatland County Extension Agent located in Harlowton in central Montana. And I am really excited to be able to join Dr. Marsha Goetting, the MS or Montana State University Extension Family and Economic Specialist. We are also very fortunate to have Carrie Hayes, who takes care of all of that technology magic we were talking about earlier. And she also makes sure that the website is all up to date and has everything you need there, as well as all of the technology while we're presenting. So this really probably wouldn't happen without her. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the 266 Montanans that have taken their time to join us today. Welcome and thank you. We're so happy to share this with you. And then also we have 16 people from out of state who are joining us, which is also excellent, and welcome to all of you also. I do want to just point out a little that everything we're covering is specific to Montana state law. So just make sure that the laws are the same in your state. So sometimes we all know that webinars can be a little bit boring. So we want to make sure that we hold your attention and you're not off cleaning the cupboards and you're wanting to be engaged. So I want to share with you our engagement tools. So our tool number one is our special guests. We are joined today by Leslie Boggess, who is a member of the Oregon 4-H Foundation, which is my old alumni, and also a Montana 4-H alumni, and she's located in Corvallis, Oregon. Roni Baker, who is the president of the Montana 4-H Foundation and the Yellowstone County 4-H Extension Agent. And then we have one other special guest today. We are so happy to be joined by Katy Lovell, who is a Montana legal developer and works for the Office on Aging for the Department of Public Health and Human Services. So we have a lot of other voices you're going to be hearing today. Our second tool are poll questions. So these questions are going to come up and you're going to get a chance to answer those. And we actually really appreciate it if you do answer them. That gives us feedback to know what we need to cover differently and what you're hearing and what you're thinking. So we really appreciate that. So this is a practice poll question. So we'll go ahead and just, Carrie will launch that poll. So if you participated in last week's session, we would like you to choose which of these actions you took as a result. Did you share that information? Did you read some of the materials in the resource section of the Fabulous Fridays website? Did you make a decision to explore a revocable trust with an attorney? Did you make a decision to further explore a testamentary trust, with an attorney? Or did you use or share the Special Needs Alliance trustee publication? So did you take any of those actions? And we probably won't spend too much time on this poll, but we'll make sure we leave enough time for other polls later in the session.
Well, Mandy, this is where I might throw out. We did have several participants indicated that, well, we're kind of new to this and we don't know how to do the polls. And so Carrie very judiciously added a section to the website on how to use the polls, whether you're on your phone. What's the word for the phone? Well, I
Cell
call it
phone.
cell phone. It's a smartphone. And it's so smart that it outsmarts me, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. So our third, we can go ahead and close this poll, I think. Yeah, and then our third engagement tool is the chat panel or the chat box. And so that's an opportunity for you as a participant to go ahead and write your questions in the chat panel. And then after we're done today, we're going to stay on an extra 15 minutes and answer as many of those questions as we get to. But if we don't get to your question, don't worry, because we'll record all of those and then you'll be getting an email as soon as there's time. So it might take a couple
Yeah.
of weeks, but you will get an email.
Can I raise my hand?
Yes,
I've got to
yes.
apologize again to those people that did ask questions from last time. I was out a week, out of the office again this week. So I will get to those. So have faith and we'll get to them.
Yeah, great. I'm also really excited to announce we have a door prize. I was thinking today, should it be called like a Zoom prize or a WebEx prize? But we have a door prize. And so if you must be present to win, but we will be drawing a name at the end of the webinar today. And the winner will get one of these fantastic, really cool Montana State University Extension and 4-H travel mugs. So definitely stay tuned for that. So Marsha, you are a wildflower enthusiast, and how will you work wildflowers into our presentation today?
Well, I am always excited to share wildflowers. And those people that have participated before know that part of the reason for doing the wildflowers is we want to have some reminders for you. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to remember, oh, the term testator or devise or devise. So I'm hoping that the wildflowers will help you remember some of those key points that we want you to find out about today. And just as an example, here's a really neat flower. And I just love it when I can try to have a live audience and have the opportunity to tell them what it is because I make them guess. Well, we don't have that kind of time here, so I tell you it's a steer's head. And what it triggers me to say is that we want to steer you to what you can do in your written will with your titled and tangible personal properties. We also want to share with you what you can't do in a will, and that's very important to know and something your attorney should make you aware of at the same time. And then we have this great program in Montana. It's the Montana Legal Development Program. They also have will forms. I get asked about that a lot, and I tell you what, we just connect to their website because they have excellent examples, and we'll be sharing those with you. Now, this is a new flower that I have never used in one of my programs, but it's a rock live forever. Now, yeah, I know it is kind of interesting, probably one of the most unusual plants that I've seen. And I took this particular one in the Anza Borrego State Park in California. Well, of course, what it makes me think about are wills and dying. And you know what a will is. It's just a written document that explains how you, as the testator, wants to have your property distributed after you're gone. And I was surprised, I guess, to find out that Montana did have some requirements for writing a will. And one of those is that you must be age 18 or older. So I bet if I could see you out there, I'd agree we are all there. And then the next one is that you must be of sound mind. And Montana defines that as knowing the nature of your property and know those to whom you would leave your property. If I was going to look out there, I'd say, okay, everybody's sound mind. Maybe except for me, because I'm last minute sometimes. And here was something just kind of comical. I found it and it said, here's your dad's will. Being of sound mind, I spin it all. And my dad thought that was a great way to go. The last Montana requirement is that you cannot be under undue influence. Well, coming to Montana from Kansas, I thought that meant that, you couldn't be under the influence of wine or beer, one of those. Well, no, it can be sometimes well, let's look at this example. Here's a man that left his bequest from the hospital bed, and it was written on the doctor's prescription pad. And in this bequest, he left $50 million to that doctor's university. So if you were one of the kids that wasn't going to receive this 50 grand, well, 50 million, what would you claim? And I dare say undue influence on the part of the doctor. You can claim anything, but proving it is a different category. Now, I'm curious about you. When did you last review your written will? Is it you don't have one? You've looked at one during the pandemic, during the past 2 years? How about 3 to 5, 6 to 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago? So Carrie will pull up this poll and you will have a chance to let us know, when did you review your written will? Okay, Mandie, if you had to answer this one, what would you say?
I am really happy to say mine has been within the last year.
Oh, very good.
We pulled ours up last year and realized our children are adults now, and several of the people that we had mentioned in our will have actually passed away, and so it was definitely time to make some changes.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Okay, Carrie, what percent have finished up with us, and can you share some of the results?
So 26% said they don't have one, and 13% said 6 to 10 years ago, and 11% said the past 2 years.
Okay, very good. Well, if this pandemic and COVID business hadn't done anything else, it's made us aware that something could happen and we need to do some planning. But you
Marsha,
guys, yes.
you got a question. Does it cost to change your will?
9 times out of 10, I'll say yes. If you had a will done by an attorney and you have a chance to redo it, and pretty soon I'm going to give you some different ways and ways that are cheaper to have your will redone. So stay tuned. So we're looking at our group here, and nationally, 7 out of 10 die without a written will. We just know that kind of information. And so my rock live forever is just going to tell you, while a rock may live forever in billions of years, we don't. And so what we need to do is write that will before it's too late. I had a call this year with a gentleman. The child was calling. Dad was in the hospital. He finally realized he was going to go to the great beyond. And so they called the attorney in, and the attorney did write a will, but the man died before he had a chance to sign that will. So don't be one of those gentlemen. So Mandie, why don't you tell us how a baneberry bush fits into our Writing a Will webinar?
All right, so this is a picture of a baneberry flower. They're really pretty with their lovely little tips on there. And next we have a picture of baneberry berries. So have you ever heard the phrase that this and such is the bane of my existence? Maybe you've even used that phrase. So we have an example of a mother's will, and she was pretty unhappy with the situation and very explicitly said that her only son was not to receive a single penny from her estate, and further went on to explain that this person had been the bane of her existence. So now attorneys don't really recommend that this is the language to include in your will, but this mother felt strongly that that's what they wanted to do. So if you feel that way, you can actually, with your will, disinherit your heirs. You can choose who you want to leave your assets to and who you do not. So you also can choose to divide your assets equally. So you could divide your assets equally among your children if that's what you chose to do, and you can do that with a will. So in this example, there were 3 children and each one got a third. You could also choose to divide your assets unequally. So there's another example here where 2 children don't receive any of the assets and one daughter receives everything. And a reason that you might choose to do this might be because that daughter was a caretaker for you in the last years of your life, and you felt like you wanted to leave those assets there. And whatever your reason is, you can choose to do that with a will. So one question that people often have is, do you have to leave at least $1 to each child? And the answer to that is no, you don't. But you do want to be sure that you name all of your children in the will. So you recognize that you have, in this case, 3 children, Maddie, Eric, and Melina, and 2 of those children have already received monetary gifts, so they will not be inheriting under this will. You can also include the provision. I guess you also, sorry, Marsha, I'm jumping around a bit, but you also want to be sure that you want to name your children so that they can't say, oh, mom inadvertently forgot that I'm one of her children and she really wanted to include me in the will. That way you're just covering that base. You can also have the provision in the will that any devisee that contests your will receive nothing. And you don't have to have any reasoning for this. You can just have that clause included in your will if that's something that you choose.
Well, Mandie, at this part, I might throw in, I get this question a lot at my meetings. And, the reality is you can contest anything, as I mentioned, but you have to be able to prove. And see, there could be circumstances under which there was undue influence was used. And the person didn't know the objects of their bounty, that there's just circumstances there. So, while we say, yeah, you can be disinherited, if there's justification for that, then the court would rule in favor of the individual that is contesting because it was undue influence.
Oh, excellent point. Thank you, Marsha. So another option that you have with your will is that you could skip a generation. So let's say that you feel like your children are well set up and established in life, and you want to gift your assets to your grandchildren, and you can do that with a will. You can also, same as with the children, choose to leave the assets to your grandchildren, but not in equal amounts. So for whatever reason you might choose, you might split up your assets in a way that one grandchild received half, 2 received a quarter each, and other grandchildren didn't receive any. And that could be for whatever reasons you have, but you can choose an unequal distribution. So this is another funny thing that we wanted to share, that another dad's will is, to my son, I leave the pleasure of earning a living. For 25 years, he thought that the pleasure was all mine, and he was mistaken. So, Marsha, does a will have to go through probate to be valid?
Okay, well, that sounds like a good question that we should ask our audience today. What do you think? Does a will have to pass through probate to be declared valid? So, very simple, yes or no. And Carrie, you can end that when you think there's enough people that have responded on that. Okay, Carrie, what's our result?
Okay, Marsha, 29% said yes and 34% said no.
Okay, well, it's good that we asked that question because, yes, a will that you have written has to be validated by the district court. In other words, it needs to go through the probate process. Now, an instance where the will wouldn't have to and actually wouldn't be used is if you took advantage of our second session that we talked about, TODs, transfer on death, payable on death. You name a life insurance beneficiary. See, all of those things are non-probate assets. And here we have a will. Well, it could be that there is absolutely no reason for the will to go through probate because there's nothing to be probated by the will. So just keep that in mind. People say, well, I want to avoid probate, but I still have a will. Well, you can't necessarily avoid probate unless you take advantage of all those non-probate items. Now, I'm going to tell you about this, but it's not something I necessarily think is a good idea to rush right out there and write your own will. This is called a holographic will. And when you have a holographic will, everything must be in your handwriting, okay? And when you do this, you do not have to have witnesses. If you have a formal will, and this would be one that you type or one that's from the computer, then yes, we have to have two witnesses because what the witnesses are supposed to evaluate is, do you understand that this is your last will and testament? Do you know the objects of your bounty? In other words, they're trying to determine if you're of sound mind. Okay? So let's look at an example of this that we had in Montana. What we had is a Montana man in the western part of the state wrote a will on motel stationery, and then he passed away. So my question for you is, do you think that the district court would consider that handwritten will valid? So a very easy answer is yes and no again, and we'll see what you think about that one. Okay, Carrie, what's our result?
So 58% said yes and 10% said no.
Okay, well, glad we asked that question as well, because this is an example of something that can happen with a will when you don't know all the rules and regs. Because this judge rejected the will, and it was on the basis that not everything was in the testator's handwriting. So look at motel stationery. What does it typically have on it? It might have a logo. It might have the mailing address. Now it would have email, telephone number, and that's why the judge rejected it. So we really need to be careful when we're doing one of these do-it-yourself approach, because it could be everything that you wanted to have happen will not because of that instance. So how do you go about changing a will? Well, it could be that you really don't have that much to change. And so you can just simply revoke your will and make a new one, or you can add what is referred to as a codicil. Now, a codicil used to be a lot more popular back in the old days, where we really did type every sheet of the will. And so if you had a 30-page will, for example, and there was just one paragraph or one provision that needed to be changed, then what the attorney would do is a codicil. I think in this day and age, while codicils are still out there, there's the opportunity to simply go in to the computer because you saved it or the attorney saved it, make the change, and then sign an entirely new will. Now, one of the things that you'll find attorneys do if you've never had a will signed before is often you will initial each page. And that way, somebody can't insert a different page in there that left it to themselves rather than the person that you were leaving it to. And another thing that you can do in a will is nominate your personal representative. Now, who is a personal representative? This is the person that you trust to step into your shoes and settle the estate. You'd like to be able to pass away and not have hassles, but they're there for a reason. We got to determine who are the heirs. We need to look and see if there is a will. So you may nominate your spouse. You may nominate an adult child. You may have a special friend that you really do trust. So those are individuals. So you need to think about that, because that's one of the questions the attorney will ask you is, who do you want to be your personal representative? The other thing that I think is very important for young parents, and I hope Katy is listening to this because she has three little ones. You need to nominate a guardian and a conservator for the child. You know, the guardian takes care of the child. So determines where they live, all those things that are involved in raising children. And then the conservator is the one that manages the money. Because if you and your husband die, you leave minor children, then somebody has to step in there and take care of that money for them. And then there's also, you may have an adult child with special needs. So you would nominate a conservator and a guardian for that individual as well. Now, one of the things that the attorney might do for you, and probably should do, is make your will self-proven. Now, you may say, well, what is a self-proven will? Well, you can see right there that there's signature lines for two witnesses. Those witnesses then are the ones that are saying, hey, that person was of sound mind when they signed the will. So therefore, those witnesses would not have to be called forward to testify that, yes, this person was of sound mind. So they also then do a notary. So the notary will be there and will also then put the stamp on the will. So if you haven't been through one of those processes before, believe me, this is not the time to be joking around. When I signed my first will, and it was years ago, I was happy-go-lucky and really being an idiot. And my attorney was furious because he said they are supposed to determine if you're of sound mind. And he said, today you just are not acting like it. So I calmed down. I then was able to do the appropriate thing. So, you know, I was tense, you know, let's give me a break there. Oh, and Mandie, before you do that, one of the other things I wanted to mention that you can do with a will is, of course, recognize your favorite charity or nonprofit. And ours, of course, would be the 4-H Foundation, wouldn't it, Mandie? So why don't you tell us about John and Millie's will situation?
All right. So John has a will, and in his will, he has left $150,000 of his estate to his wife, Millie. But at the time of John's death, they are divorced, and John is actually remarried. So I have a question for you. Who is going to receive that $150,000? So if you'll just take a second and answer this, will it be Millie? Will it be Sarah, his new wife? Will it be his children? Or will it be his parents?
That's a tricky question, Mandie.
It is. And I'm curious to see what everybody says.
This is one that I was embarrassed about because I had someone in my audience and I was using a very similar question and I was wrong. Oh, I was mortified because I didn't know there'd been a new law passed. So, what do you think there, Carrie? What's our result?
49% said Millie, his former wife. Only
Mhm.
8% said Sarah. 4% said John's 3 children. And 4% said John's parents.
Oh,
All
they're not
right.
agreeing there, Mandie.
No, so I'm really glad we asked this question, and I'm also really glad that all of you answered. So, so Millie will not inherit, and Sarah, his present wife, also will not inherit. His parents won't inherit, and so that money will pass to his children, and they will receive 1/3 each. So one important note that we didn't tell you was that this will was dated before their divorce. So the divorce in Montana, a divorce will revoke the bequest of property to a former spouse. So that's why that would happen.
So that's
And
why we got the 3 kids that are
yes,
his bloodline, so to speak, to receive that.
yes, exactly. So So it is really important when we have life events like a death or a divorce or a remarriage to go in and update our wills to make sure that that's what's happening, or that what they say is what we want to have happen. So if that will had been dated after the divorce, it would have been honored. So John may have really intended for Millie to inherit that money and thought, oh, I already have that in my will, I don't need to change anything, and not been aware that his divorce would revoke that. And so if that really was his intention, what he needed to do was update the will, and so that it was dated after the divorce. So Marsha, what about a legal separation document?
Well, I kind of thought legal separation was the same as a divorce, and it is not. There's a specific provision in Montana law that said a legal separation is not a divorce under the Montana Uniform Probate Code. So any bequests that separated spouses have made to one another in a will, that is still going to happen. Now, I could be wrong, but I think if you've been separated for 20 years, it's probably time to decide, but definitely take care of that. I did have a participant at one of my meetings, and she said, I have been separated for 20 years from that man. And my attorney told me, well, she was living in Wyoming at the time. She is now a Montana resident. So therefore, she's got some tough decisions to make on what she wants to have happen. Now, Mandie said you can disinherit any of the kids that you want. Sure. Now, don't try to do that with your spouse. Montana does not allow you to totally disinherit a spouse. They passed a provision that says now that surviving spouse has a right to an elective share. And this is based on the number of years that they've been married. So here's an example of just one of the charts. And what we're looking at here is a situation where obviously the legislature thinks the longer you have been married, the more that spouse should receive. Now, this is a protective device, really. It's to make sure that a spouse is provided for, that Montana doesn't have to step in and take care of that spouse. And it's not an easy thing. They have what they call the marital portion of the augmented estate. Oh, yawn. It is really challenging because the augmented estate includes hers and his. And it's almost like they put it in one big pile. And then they say, okay, the spouse is entitled to 1/3 of that. Well, she may already be receiving 1/3 because they had property in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. It could have been that he provided for her, for example, a transfer on death designation on all of his stocks and bonds. So it's not like she's left penniless. So keep that in mind. And here's a guy I call Heine. And yes, this is a real will. And he made his wife, the sole beneficiary, because there will be at least one man to regret my death. Okay, so write a will. Get one done, and do that so that you're not the bane of somebody's existence. Now, Mandie, how about a dog bane? How would a dog bane flower fit into writing a will?
Well, many of us, I don't know, a lot of us are very devoted pet owners, and you might be one of those people. And in Montana, there's an estate planning tool for the owners of pets. So in Montana, you can have an honorary trust for your pets. So believe it or not, you can set up money, set it aside for people to be able to care for your animals when you pass away. So the trust is set up for 21 years. And then if the amount that you leave exceeds what the judge would decide is an adequate amount to care for your pet, then the district judge can decide to reduce that amount. So if I left my dog, say, $2 million, the judge might say, you know, that seems a little bit excessive, and could go ahead and reduce that amount. But you can leave funds set aside to support your pets. It's also a good idea to talk about who's going to take care of your pets. But anyway, tips from our dog bane are that if you have a beloved pet, you can definitely take advantage of Montana's statutory pet trust to make sure that there is money set aside to take care of them.
Yeah, and it's so interesting out there, the number of pet owners that really want to provide for their animals, and that's why the legislature passed that particular provision. So it's neat for those that want to do something like that.
Well, and pets could be an expense that you hadn't really thought about before, and a burden to people who you ask to take care of them. So yeah, it's very cool that that's an option. So next we're going to think about the white mule's ears, and what that makes us think of. So in a prior Fabulous Friday, we talked about how mom or dad could just be stubborn as a mule. And if you remember in that earlier story, dad told the kids, don't worry, you get the ranch. I have it all taken care of in the will. But he also had his ranch in joint tenants with right of survivorship with his new wife. So if you remember in that story, when dad passed away, the new wife inherited the entirety of the ranch, and his children didn't inherit anything, regardless of what his will said. Because, just as a reminder, we can't undo a payable on death designation with a will. So that is
Or a joint tenancy either. You can't undo a
yep.
joint tenancy with a will.
Yes, those are contracts, and we can't undo a contract with a will. And then we also can't undo a life insurance beneficiary with a will. So if we have named a beneficiary on our life insurance policy, we can't use our will to distribute that money unless we name the estate as our beneficiary. So again, we can't undo that contract. So what we're going to remember from our white mule's ears is that we cannot will away our share of joint tenancy with right of survivorship until the joint tenants are deceased. So we can't undo a POD or a TOD with a will. All right, so Marsha, can my will have the final say over my transfer on death deeds? So tell us about that.
Oh, no way. Well, I don't want to give it away, but here it is. Remember Gary Blue? Here he is. He named his daughter as his TODD beneficiary. So he files this transfer on death, and he does that in the county where the land is located. Well, then what he did was write a will, and he's leaving the same property to his son, Matt. And of course, you all know now that you cannot undo that. So what's happening is Linda Blue is going to receive it all because that is the transfer on death deed that was filed at the clerk and recorder's office. And poor old Matt is out there receiving zero. And even though he tells his sister, Dad wanted me to have that, can't you tell he wrote the will later? It's not going to happen. So you just need to plan. And we don't know about Gary's situation. Maybe he forgot that he had already filed, which might be some indicators of some memory loss, and there's some issues there that might need to be taken care of. So you can't undo a transfer on death deed with a will. And it doesn't matter if the will was written before or after the transfer on death deed was done. So keep in mind, those of you that are thinking about a will and you're also thinking about a transfer on death deed, you've got to coordinate those. You can't have one saying something different because it's going to be the TODD that will take priority every time. Now, I like this flower. If you can imagine, 4 umbrellas around it at the time we were trying to take it because it was so windy at Glacier. But I want this wise old owl to explain about a separate listing of tangible personal property. So this is something you can have as a part of the will. And the attorney that's writing the will probably shake a finger at you and say, I'm going to put this paragraph in the will. Now you've got to fill it out. Well, what do I mean by tangible personal property? These are the items that I say have emotional value in a family. It could be those photo albums. It could be, I've got a grandfather clock that my mom and dad drove all the way out from Kansas, and it looked like they were carrying a coffin, but it was a grandfather clock. Quilts, silver dollars in a safe deposit box, all those kinds of things. Those are examples of tangible personal property. So as I mentioned, Montana has a requirement that you have to have the paragraph in the will. Then your separate listing is over here. And you can handwrite that. You can put it in the computer, which I finally did because I was changing it. And it's so much easier to update if you've got a file in the computer. And then you just need to sign it and date it every time you do that. So I've got my Grandma Ray's opal ring, and I've got my niece receiving that, and I've got the sapphire ring, a sister, and a ladle, another sister. So that's how you list those things. And, you know, you need to be really clear about which item it is. Don't just say the ring or the necklace. You've got to be more specific. And I even had one grandmother who shared with me a notebook that she had put together. It was really a photo album. And in that, she had taken photographs of the items that she wanted to go to her relatives. Now, she still had to have the written list. You couldn't just do that and have pictures and write on it. I mean, that's the provision in the law. So it has to be written or typed in that case. So you can take advantage of Montana's separate listing of tangible personal property. And believe me, you're going to save, you know, sisters and brothers from fighting over custody of things. I mean, in Western Montana, we have two brothers that have not spoken for 20 years. And the reason is one brother got in and took the antique gun, and the other brother said, supposed to be mine. Dad told me he wanted me to have it. You know, and now they're the cousins. The cousins have the same situation. You know, they want to honor their dad, but they like their uncle, and here it is over a gun. So don't let that happen. At least they could get mad at you. You're gone. That's okay. You know, have the separate listing. Now, here we have the flame lily from Botswana, and I just want you to be on fire to get your will written now before it's too late. So this is where Katy's going to help us out. Katy, just to reiterate, is our Montana legal developer with the Office on Aging, and she's with the Department of Public Health and Human Services. So thank you, Katy, for joining us. So tell us about the free phone clinics.
Yeah. So my program, I work for the state of Montana. Our office offers phone clinics, which is an ability for anyone who's 60 or older or an adult with a disability to have their estate planning documents done for free. It's a statewide program, and they can just call our office and make an appointment, and all of the documents are done by a legal professional. They're reviewed by an attorney, and we send them to you with instructions on how to finalize them. And we can also do Indian wills for folks, anyone over the age of 18.
Okay, so I could get one of these. Well, okay, I'm 60 and older, and there's no income limitation. It really is. I just call that number and you'll help me with a will.
Absolutely. Now, we do simple wills in estates. So if you have a really complicated estate, if you have a lot of really complicated factors and our forms are not appropriate for you, then we're going to let you know that, give you the best legal advice possible, and then we're going to make referrals out to Montana attorneys that can handle your specialized situation.
Oh, great. Well, what about clinics? I know you used to hold those clear
Yeah.
across the state.
The in-person clinics are one of my favorite parts of the summer. They are a wonderful experience for people anywhere across the state. They happen once a month from April to this year we go through August. We're going to be in Columbus in April, Dillon in May, June we're going to be in Havre, July, we're going to be in Poplar and Glasgow. And in August, we're going to be in Kalispell. So if you're in a community near there, you can call and make an appointment for one of those clinics. You do have to have an appointment ahead of time. We do some screening and we get you prepped and ready for the clinic and the important decisions that you're going to have to make that day. But you get to leave the clinic with a complete set of notarized and copied documents and then finalized instructions on what to do with each of the documents. And it's a completely free program.
Oh, and that's great. And I just want to let folks know that this schedule is at our website, and it's also at the Department of Office of Aging's website as well. I know we went really fast. You're saying, wait a minute, I want to see where that was. Well, the sheet is at there, so you'd be able to print it out and let your friends know that such a thing is available. And then I'm just listing here, this link is also at the Fabulous Fridays. And these are some of the forms that you have, but as I understand it, there's more there than just will forms, right? There's a whole bunch of forms.
There's a lot of forms that Montanans might need to think about when they're planning for their estate. So there's things like your declaration of homestead, which protects your home from unsecured debt, the transfer on death deed. We have forms up there for that. You have the healthcare and financial powers of attorney. So all sorts of forms that people might need. And then we also put instructions up there so that folks can have some instructions on how to fill out the forms, and they can be downloaded in Word or as a PDF.
Yeah, and I was really delighted to see that you have them for single people, because we do have folks that are viewing and they say, we're left out a lot, and you just deal with married. But we got the married forms in there for you guys too. So this is just a super duper service. I had a chance to attend one of these in Helena and just observe what was going on. And wow, these people had it down to a science. They have printers there. They have, like she says, you just walk right out and you have a will. It's great.
Katie, I have one question here that pertains to this. Are those free clinics only for Montanans?
They do have to be a Montana resident. That's correct.
That's probably somebody from across the border that's real close to North Dakota. But we do want to encourage you to take advantage of the Montana Legal Developer Wills Program, whether it be phone or in person. Tell your friends about it, because it's great service that we have in Montana. Okay, Mandie.
All right. So once again, thank you. And time is starting to slip away. We want to make sure that we leave time for our other guests. So we're hoping today that we steered you in the direction of what you can do with a will and your titled tangible properties. We hope that we have reminded you of what you can't do with a will, so that you're sure that your estate is left the way you want it to be. And that we have also made you aware of the Legal Developer Program and the will forms. That is a great program, so definitely make sure that you take advantage of that. I also want to take a second, we've mentioned it multiple times, but in case you don't have a memory like the little elephant head flower, we want to remind you that all of our Mont guides on estate planning are available. Follow this QR code, so they're available on the website. And we also want you to remember, don't forget, like these forget-me-nots, that the Montana Mont Guide fact sheets are also available at your MSU County and Reservation Extension offices. So go ahead and stop in and say hello, and they'll be able to get those for you. And those are also available on the Fabulous Fridays website, where all of the resources are. And again, you can either follow this this QR code or Google this web address and find it that way too. So I'd like to remind you that next week's topic, going too fast, I'm getting all tongue-tied, is living legacies with the Montana tax benefits. And so hopefully you'll be able to join us on February 24th. And now I would like to turn it over to our two special guests. So I'll let Roni go ahead and introduce Leslie and welcome. And we're so happy you were able to join us.
Thanks, Mandie. Really appreciate the opportunity. I'm the Yellowstone County 4-H Extension Agent, as well as the president of the Montana 4-H Foundation. So it is exciting today to be here and to interview our special guest. So, Leslie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and kind of tell about your history and background in 4-H.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here today from Corvallis, Oregon. I grew up in Montana. I was born in Cut Bank and then moved to Great Falls, where my 4-H career began. And I was a longtime 4-H'er in Cascade County. The programs that I was involved with were clothing, dress review, which was called dress review at the time, junior leadership, demonstration. I was a camp counselor, and it provided me with what I like to call, or we like to call, the spark. I went on to college, first at Montana State, and then I transferred to Washington State, and I majored in apparel design and merchandising, and then went on to, I just discovered I liked research and the teaching piece, and went on to Purdue University in Indiana, my father was a 4-H'er there, and a big 4-H family in Indiana. Got my PhD at Purdue, and then went on for a career that I taught and conducted research in apparel design and merchandising at Oregon State University for 30 years, and then started my own consulting business focusing on sustainable fashion. It was really when I was at Purdue that the idea of giving back to 4-H was put into my brain. There is an award in honor of my grandmother at Tippecanoe County in dress review. And when I was there, I was honored to be able to go to the dress review and see the young woman receive this award. And it was, oh my gosh, I forget how exciting that is. In Cascade County, when my father passed away, we established an award in honor of my father, and it's a junior leadership, so it's the top leadership award in Cascade County for a 4-H'er. And we continue to do that, my sisters and I, with that award. When I came to Oregon, it was actually the mother of the young man who received the John Davis Award in Cascade County, who wrote a note to me and said, "You may not realize how important these things are, and I just want to tell you how important they are." And I went, I want to do more. So I contacted the Oregon 4-H Foundation, and I said, I want to establish a scholarship in my mother's name, and did that. And then decided that, the spark for me was travel. And so I've established a travel fund through the Oregon 4-H Foundation, and I'm establishing a travel fund for 4-H'ers through the Montana 4-H Foundation. Going back to what's in my will and what's not in my will, part of it is there are specific things in my will, but I also have both the Oregon 4-H Foundation and the Montana 4-H Foundation as beneficiaries on accounts that, as there was mentioned, will not go through probate. So those just go directly when I pass. One of the things that when I worked with my attorney in putting my estate plan together, she asked wonderful questions. And one of them was, do you really want to wait until you die for any of this to happen? And I said, let's start some things now. And so I was able to do some current use with both the Oregon 4-H Foundation and also with Cascade County, and am working with Montana 4-H Foundation now to do some current use kinds of things. So that's a long introduction, but I think captured some of the ideas.
No, thank you. I think it's perfect. We kind of go back, we share the common interest to both being Cascade County 4-H'ers and getting our own personal start there. The thing that I think is really interesting and I appreciate is your kind of your family legacy of involvement in 4-H and giving back, and whether that's awards or scholarship, endowment, or in your will. And I think those are really, really great examples of ways that people can think about, whether it's 4-H or whatever your passion is, or your spark, as you say, to determine ways that you can do that. And the idea that, you know, like your attorney said, how about now? What could you see now that would make you feel the value of that and those things, even before you die? And I think those are great things. So,
And I think that as you mentioned, there are so many different ways to give back, and it doesn't have to be a lot of money. And it, you know, I think for me, of when I was asked the question, what would be meaningful for you, and what was your spark, and what do you want to spark in others? Part of this, I think, with my education background, I always said that my job as a professor was to create opportunities. And I think that that's the same kind of, okay, what kind of opportunities were meaningful to me, and how might that help 4-Hers in the future?
yeah, well, thank you for your connection of that and what that is. And the other part that I was just thinking was just even that your 4-H projects, and that's true for many of us, have led to our careers and our career paths and our passion and what that is, and the generational component of that.
So let me just add a little story there. I'll pipe in with a little story because, okay, I was in clothing and dress review. I saved all of my 4-H dress review. I have a little mini clothing collection, but I also have all the accessories. I have the fabric. I have the patterns. I have my record book with all of, I know. And so again, what do I want to have happen to that? Well, that's actually going to, and this is in my will, with money, that's going to the Cascade Historical Society. And it has all, because it's from Cascade County. And so, and it's a tangible, so a lot of it is included in that tangible, but there's also a piece that this is the amount of money for the storage and for taking care of this, but it's my 4-H project.
That is awesome. I don't know if, Leslie, I'm going to move over just a minute. I don't know if you guys can see behind me here. These are items that actually I've had people come in my office here in Billings and say, you know, we were going through my mother's stuff. She recently passed away. Would you like this dress? And the dress is from 1950, which was the uniform of 4-H in Montana at that time. So I really love that. And I kind of have this collection. The jacket that's here is a grandfather whose granddaughter is involved in 4-H. And he wore that at the 1959 National Congress. And so we took pictures of him, his granddaughter wearing it, and with him recently at the fair, and have a little plaque there that we put up. And so so many great ways to give back and be involved in that. So probably we're about out of time, Marsha and Mandie. That was a great conversation. The only thing I would add is, you know, talk to your attorney, talk to the foundation you're interested in giving to. Jane Woolery is the executive director of the Montana 4-H Foundation. But also, if you go into your local county office or talk to 4-H folks, they should be able to direct you to that if that's a spark area of yours and a passion where you may want to give.
Well, super job. Great to meet you, Leslie.
Nice meeting you too.
Just honored to have you. And thanks a lot, Roni, for serving as our question person this morning. I got to throw in, Roni is a very busy person. And not only is she helping, you know, with this kind of thing, then she's also the ESP Epsilon Sigma Phi person who is working on our national meeting that's going to be held in Billings. And it's just really great to see. And she's doing the 4-H Foundation president. So I can't keep up with her, but I'll say hi and bye. And we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. And thanks again very much, Leslie, for joining us today and sharing that personal. I love the story about you still have everything. And it's so wonderful that you left money so that they can do that. So thank you very much. Bye-bye for you guys. We're going to hang around here and see if there's some questions that people have. So you're welcome to join us if you like. Okay, Carrie, got a question or two, I bet.
Yes. So, do you need witnesses and a notary on your will?
If you have a handwritten will, you do not need to have the witnesses and the notary. But if you have a typed one, or you have a form that you bought on the internet, or the attorney, they're going to have you have two witnesses, because two witnesses are required. And then the notary is just that extra step to make the will self-proven. Okay?
Okay, next question. Do you have to contact charities to fill out paperwork?
The answer to that is no. But if you're going to make a significant gift, I think that would be a really good idea, because they could also tell you about some of the things we'll talk about next week. That there's the Montana Endowment Tax Credit, and you can do a gift annuity and save on your Montana taxes at the same time. But I'm like Leslie, I've got POD to some of my favorite charities, and a TOD on some stocks and bonds. And that way it just goes directly to them, and it's not a big deal. And sometimes you want to remain anonymous. So you can contact your favorite nonprofit and say, I want to do this, but the catch is I don't want any publicity about it. I just want to be able to do it. I want to be able to give back and help other people like I was helped in the 4-H program.
Can I just add one little thing to that? When I was establishing the scholarship for my mother as an endowment, and I looked at a number of nonprofits with regards to where to establish that scholarship. And the Oregon 4-H Foundation, I'm sure this is true of the Montana 4-H Foundation as well, had a very small, relatively small compared to other nonprofits, administrative fee. And so when I was establishing that endowment, more of my money went to, in fact, the program and exactly what I wanted that program to do, where other nonprofits had higher administrative fees, or there wasn't as much control over how those funds got spent. So it's just one thing to consider.
Leslie, I have an idea. You should write a Mont guide on the questions to ask of charities before you make that decision, because that's really true. It's just disheartening to find some charities that are spending way more for administrative costs than is really, and that's when you say, no, that's probably not the best one. But 4-H is one that has a super duper reputation, and we've got some youth out there just warm your heart because you think this is our future, and isn't it great? Okay, more questions there, Carrie.
Sorry, I was getting the poll up. So,
Oh, okay.
yes, there is. I'm having a hard time seeing them at the moment.
Okay, well, that's okay. Why don't you continue to look? Because I do see one that is asking about the recording. And yes, indeed, if you go to the Fabulous Fridays website, you'll find, past, on the left-hand side, there's a category called past programs. And as of today, this will be a past program. So the recording would be there as well. And so you can watch it at any point in time.
Okay, I found some. Sorry.
Okay.
Does tangible lists go through probate with fees for their value?
Oh, the reality is that in the days where we had the inheritance tax, your personal representative had to list everything that's on there and assess a value to it. Well, with some of our tangible personal property, there really isn't a value. The value is more emotional. Now, true, if you had a Charlie Russell painting, and you would want to establish a basis for that, because everything gets stepped up when we die. So Charlie Russell cost you $100, now it's worth $1 million. Woo! what you get to do is step up the basis there. But it's not like you're going to pay an inheritance tax. And unless you, as a married couple, have more than $25 million, there's not even a federal estate tax to worry about. So those things are just not really a big deal. In the old days, yes. In the present days, no, it's really not a big deal for that.
Okay, Marsha, next question. Can a pet guardian and conservator go in a will?
Yes, that is a very good question. Because it is an honorary trust, Mandie, I think it's probably a good idea that they name the trustee, don't you? Yeah, in your, a will, you could do that if you don't have a trust. But if you decide you're going to have the honorary trust, well, there's a form for that. We've got a Mont guide, okay, and it tells you about the trust and selecting a trustee and coming up with ideas. And we have another handout there as well from the Humane Society that looks at costs and things to think about, even proving that the animal is your animal and not some other animal that somebody substitutes in there just so they can keep getting paid for it, for the care, but they're not, the poor animal died years ago. So those things happen as well. Okay, I can finally read some of these myself. Yay! Okay. If you TODD a home, transfer on death home, are the contents included? That is a decision that you will need to make. In some cases, you have a situation where dad or mom have remarried. Okay, and you're wanting to TOD this to somebody else. Well, what you really mean is the home, and then you've got these contents. So a suggestion would be is you have those contents as a separate listing in your will. And now we also have separate listing for trusts. So your trust includes all your title items, checking, savings, certificates, and deposit. But there's now a provision under Montana trust law to have this separate list that includes all of those littler items that may be in the home that have emotional value to the children from a past marriage. So think about that. And, who cares about the stove, but they may care about grandma's rocking chair for that.
Marsha, there was one more question. How do you revoke a will?
Oh, well, you'll find that when you're going to have a will written, one of the very first things after your name is you say, I hereby revoke all prior wills. And once you do that, you should throw the old will away. You don't want to have one coming up. Some of these famous people that die, wills come out of the woodwork. And you want the latest, but it's just better to say, I hereby revoke all prior wills. So I'm assuming you're going to write a new will. Otherwise, you could have a statement that says, I just revoke this will. But we still need the new one, so take advantage of that.
Okay, Marsha, another question. Can you put photos of items in the will?
No, legally, let's have the separate listing where you have everything listed. And then if you want to go ahead and have some photographs of items, that's fine. But the will itself is a legal document. And the list becomes a part of that legal document. But at this point in time, there are no provisions that allow for photographs to be a part of a will. And the same thing goes when you go in to have your will written, you may be videotaped and you say, whoa, but no, you're not being videotaped as the will because Montana does not accept video. But what the attorney is doing, and particularly if we have a large estate and we know that there's going to be a contentious environment with some of the children, An attorney will go ahead and videotape to prove that dad or mom was of sound mind when and wasn't under undue influence when they signed the will. So if you are videotaped, don't be disturbed by that, and the attorney will tell you about it. But I don't have enough that anybody's going to worry about, so it won't be a big deal. Any other questions?
Yes. If our home is in joint tenancy with right of survivorship, our son is the TODD. If one passes and remarries, does the TODD still remain valid if not revoked?
Okay, that is an excellent question because we're going to have those kinds of things happening. And you see, when you're going to do the TODD in that fashion, you need to have the joint tenant sign off on that. So the joint tenant also signs the TOD, and then that will mean that upon their death, it does go to that son. But if that joint tenant does not sign off, then the joint tenant receives it, period. It becomes legally theirs. So keep that in mind.
Marsha, I think that's all the questions.
Just saw one, Carrie, one
Okay.
just popped up. Excuse me, that if a person is listed as the beneficiary on a life insurance policy and the will says to divide it equally, which has priority?
It's going to be the life insurance contract, right, Mandie? It's just going to be the contract. Always think of what is out there that's a contract. And anytime you name a beneficiary, that becomes a contract. So the person that's named as the beneficiary gets it all. The will has no effect saying, I want it to go to these other businesses or other places. I'm sorry, I was noticing in the chat room are there any plans to address in future webinars succession planning for small businesses in Montana? And Mandie, I think Joel Schumacher has been doing some work in that area. He's our other economic specialist with Extension, and he has been running some small business seminars. So my suggestion would be do a search on small business and Joel, and those are being taped as well, and he can help you track down one of those. But if you want me to answer that, I can also give you the contact information for Joel after we finish off today.
Marsha, I sent him the link to that
Okay,
small
great.
business webinars, but there's no succession planning in that webinar series, just to let you know. So,
Oh, really?
yeah.
We'll have to give them some ideas on that because, oh, that's really important. Farms and ranches, they call it succession planning because what you're wanting to do is get it to the next generation. And succession planning is more looking at the individuals that you want to do this. And I kind of view estate planning as getting into the legal parts of it. That's an interesting thing. I know. I'll just tell Joel he needs to do succession planning as a part of that small business thing for his next series. Think he'll listen to me, Andy?
Marsha, he may have you come on to be a webinar. To do a webinar for small business webinars. So,
Yeah, that would require some thinking of a little bit different thing. And that's the thing. I've got some people that are saying, okay, we know you do Fabulous Fridays. Well, how many different programs can you do? And I go, well, I guess I'll make a list for these people because they're wanting to look at the future. But, wills, there's property ownership, there's dying without a will in Montana, there's trusts. And next time I'm just going to do, Mandie, when we do this, one on trusts that are testamentary and another session on revocable living trusts because I was just trying to cover too much in an hour for both of those topics when they're each separate. Okay, Carrie, is it time for you to perform your magic to determine who gets the mug for today? Or the travel mug?
sure.
Can you do your cute thing like you did last time?
Okay, wait. Just give me a
Okay.
minute here.
Sure. I'll just keep blabbing. You want to say something, Mandie?
Okay.
Want to say something, Roni?
Sorry, I just had to do a few things. So,
Okay, sure. All that techie stuff that I'm glad you're doing and I'm not.
hey, are you ready?
Oh, isn't that cute? Oh, no, very good.
So it looks like Clell win, and I'm really glad because he's on every session.
Okay, well, that's super. Well, Carrie will get that off to you. Glad you received it. Well, let's see. Save the poll questions. Yes. Okay. Uh-oh. I did it again. I clicked something. And anyway,
Okay,
we'll
you're
go on.
okay, Marsha. Just go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. Well, again, we thank everybody for joining us on our fabulous Fridays. And we're looking forward to seeing you again next week when we're going to be looking at the Montana Endowment Tax Credit and how your Montana Medical Care Savings Account could be a legacy, at least for one more year. And so, everybody, be safe and keep healthy. And thanks again for joining us for Fabulous Fridays. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.